Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature video number 146, the Mystic Test Book of the Hindu Occult Chambers, kind of a self-advertisement within the context of a title, by DeLaurence, of course. Now, he was known for having his picture up front in all the books, somewhat sensationalist titles, a lot of run-on sentences in the first chapter or two. But it is actually a very, very good book, and it covers a plethora of different topics, so get into a little bit of that. As usual, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. It is the least expensive edition. Second and third links to my books blogs, where you can get other works that are sort of quasi-academic from this period. If you're into these sort of Victorian-era literature, I've got you covered. I've got like a dozen different works from that era on that sort of material, mostly in the academic category, although there are some theosophical works in the spirituality category that are roughly similar in some of their content. But it isn't a good work. I'm working on a second work by DeLaurence now, actually. And you'll know him as the man who compiled the Greater Key of Solomon as well. So interesting individual. Had a wide-ranging number of occult things that he was interested in. Probably the best content here actually deals with seances, telepathy, and also scrying, like not just crystal gazing, although he does use that term for it. Essentially the concept of, in the Hindu sense, gazing onto a crystal to relax, to meditate. He takes that further. He takes that sort of trance-like state and says, oh, well, in the Western sense, you can use that to like tell people sort of like there are spirits around them. And he uses a very Western explanation, by the way, for some authentically Eastern practices, like the concept of the Hindu mirror, not necessarily routinely used in Hinduism in an official sense, but in the sense of actual fortune-telling or seeing spirits absolutely. He uses the concept that these are celestial intelligences after the elements in the sense that the Hermetics would describe them, really. Now, with the sylphs and gnomes sort of material, that was the sort of occult he was actually into. It's obvious that he generally would fuse East and West, and then advertise his own services. He's referring to himself as a medium within the context of this work, claiming telepathy is very much real, that large groups can achieve it even at distance. Now, it does roughly mimic, by the way, there was a practice, this was spoken of, I believe in the Petit Albert. I believe that's the specific grimoire from 2 centuries before that mentions this. Actually, 1 century before in that case, I believe. Although I can't remember, it could have been the Enchiridion. I'm drawing a blank on which particular work. They run together after a while when you've edited dozens of grimoires. But now there was one practice where you would use a magnetized needle and sort of a little wooden thing, almost like a Ouija board, and you could actually communicate at distance with it. Using one was like mobile, and your friend would have it, and they would use it to communicate with you, and supposedly you'd be able to communicate in real time with them. Of course, this sort of goes the way of the dinosaur once you have the telegraph, and in the telegraph age, with DeLaurence, of course, he's speaking about a mental connection. You don't find a lot of references to this after radio becomes widespread, by the way. Once you start getting people using shortwave to communicate at distance, certainly in the TV era, and now into the internet era, there's really no reason to want to communicate at distance with someone. The concept of telepathy regresses to just, you can mentally communicate with someone without actually using words. It's sort of an interesting thing. He speaks a little bit about hypnotism, but not much. The work I'm working on now is strictly about mesmerism and hypnotism by DeLaurence, and it's a bit shorter. And this work is about 130 pages. I think it came out slightly under that. The original is closer to 200, but you've got to understand the format of works from this early 20th century period. Usually the lines between different lines of text, the blank space, was considerably larger. The width, the margins on the sides of the paper tended to be bigger, and so you actually end up with a considerably different page number. It's not like the older grimoires. Sometimes you go back to the 1700s, they tried to cram 4 or 5 different lines in teeny tiny sub 8-point text into the document. It's like the South Sea Herbal is essentially a 10-page manuscript, but if you extrapolate that out and you try to edit it into a modern format, it's closer to, I think, 30 or 40 pages, so it's actually in reverse. I actually like the 18 and 1900s. The larger text, it's a little bit easier to edit from. Trust me, I actually like that better. But it's an interesting work. If you're interested in telepathy, seances, Certainly crystal gazing in the sense of seeing spirits, seeing people's auras. Astral travel is briefly covered within this manuscript. All of that sort of psychic and pseudo-new agey stuff from the early 20th century, it's all covered at least in brief here. After the first couple chapters. Don't judge the book by the first chapter or you'll think that it's crazy. That's basically just DeLaurence rambling about these sort of out there concepts in his own, probably opium-addled way. But it gets into the nitty-gritty in Chapter 3 and continues through the rest of the book. It is extremely interesting. Now, DeLaurence gets a bum rap sometimes for his advertising style. Basically, oh, buy my other book here, you can learn more about this subject, and here's a picture of me that has nothing to do with the text. But he was a good editor and author, really, when it comes to these things. An interesting individual. If you read up about him a little, it's like a little bit wonky. So again, link in the description to my edition of this work. Second and third links to my books, blogs, both Blogspot and WordPress. I use them both. That's about all. Peace out.